Hey everyone, welcome to our video on concerns, specifically negotiating buyer concerns. And objectives, first we will discuss what we mean by negotiations and how it relates to win strategy. Then we will identify the most common types of buyer concerns, and we'll also discuss some methods and how to handle these concerns or negotiate them. So in terms of our big picture sales process, we're now into the negotiation stage. When we define negotiation, we want to think of it as working to reach an agreement that is mutually satisfactory to both the buyer and the seller. So that's what we mean by win-win. So it has to be mutual. It has to benefit both parties. Remember, this really aligns with the idea that we are consultants. We're here to provide solutions to the buyer problems. Because again, we want to build that long-term relationship. So really think about the sales process and how we've done that already. And that's what I want you to think about before we even get into the concerns, is recognize that a lot of the steps we've taken is going to help us minimize these buyer concerns. Nonetheless, it is important to identify what the concerns could be. All right? So first is the actual need for the product. Whether or not we actually need this product can be sometimes of a concern. Now, this isn't always the case in terms of hospitality, because the good news is when a client knows they need to book a meeting space, or even when a client walks into a restaurant, we know that they're going to buy, they need to purchase that product. So that's good news for us. But remember, even meetings sometimes, particularly with the use of online, with the challenges that we've experienced, sometimes we might have to remind the client the value of the need of that meeting. Now, services is specific to your hotel services. This definitely can be a buyer concern, particularly if you're a new hotel and you haven't been really established. That can be a challenge sometimes in terms of dealing with that concern. Source. So what do we mean by a source concern? This is really an issue more of loyalty. So if a client has already had successful meetings at another brand or another property, how are we going to make sure that they come over to our property? That can be an emotional attachment they have with another hotel. How do we deal with this concern? Another concern, or another tactic perhaps, that a buyer can use is just the use of more time. They might want to stall for more time. And really this is for us, because we have a perishable inventory such as a meeting space or a hotel room that can only be sold during that day or that night. We can always remind our clients that they might be booked with other clients. So that can be one way to deal with this time issue. And finally, most importantly, most common is the objection of price. And we'll speak a little bit more about this. But of course, there's always a price concern when anyone's buying something. And how do we negotiate or deal with this objection? So some generic denial methods in terms of how we deal with negotiating these concerns is there's direct denial and indirect denial. So let's talk about direct denial first. And we'll use an example in order to understand this. They might say something a little inaccurate. So for instance, they might say that, you know what, I believe the Marriott has a bigger meeting space than yours. So they just might be misinformed. And really, in this case, we're actually going to correct the client. We're just going to, and we say it in a respectful manner. We're going to be firm and sincere, but we just want to clarify the truth and maybe show them, we can look at 2 floor plans and recognize that our meeting space is in fact bigger. So that's an example of the direct denial. We're actually refuting what the client is stating. Now, an indirect denial is when a client is actually, they do have a valid point. They're not completely incorrect, but we're in a way we are downplaying the value that they might be stating with that claim. So I'll give you an example here. So for instance, going back to that charity dinner, they might say, your hotel is not the only hotel that has an award-winning chef. Did you know the Marriott also has an award-winning chef? We did our homework, we understand that. But what we also realized that yes, the Marriott does have an award-winning chef, but he received this award 10 years ago. Our chef was awarded this award just last year. This is an example of an indirect denial. So we're recognizing the validity of what they're saying, but we're also downplaying, we're denying its relevance in a sense, what is actually valuable. Some methods of negotiating buyer concerns. Reminder, use questions. We've already used questions during the discovery phase, we've used need satisfaction questions. Recall the probing and the confirmation questions. These helped us identify the problems and confirm the solutions. So we already know that we can use this as a tactic to remove those concerns. So that's one effective manner. Of course, we can stress the superior benefits. If we can show the guests that we have a superior benefit, we have that award-winning chef that's current and has won that award recently, that shows that superior benefit. Great way to negotiate that buyer concern. And another excellent way we can stick to the food quality is, why don't we get that award-winning chef to actually sample a nice plate for you, and they can actually experience it. So demonstration by far is the most convincing way to overcome buyer skepticism. This is especially true not only if you're familiar with your own product, right? So we know we have an award-winning chef, but we also know that the Marriott has, yes, they had an award-winning chef, but that was 10 years ago, and we know their food isn't as good. So if they actually demonstrated and experienced both of them, then we know that's going to be an effective way to deal with any skepticism in terms of buyer concerns. Trial offer, another incredible opportunity. Perhaps they might feel, again, going back to the issue of loyalty, they might feel hesitant to join your meeting space or join your brand. Come in for one meeting, see how you feel, and then we can talk about more commitments. So this is a good opportunity of a trial offer, right? Testimonials, again, going back to the loyalty issues. If you can provide a testimonial from another client that has experienced your service, then that's really reassuring for them, okay? And finally, a postponed method. This might happen sometimes when you might be making a sales presentation, right? But the buyer just seems to want to request some different menu items or a combination of items, right? But again, if we went through the process, we understood exactly what the conditions are, what we need to do in this case is we need to postpone our offering. We need to go back to the chef, or maybe even go back to the director of rooms if they're looking for more rooms or a different date, and just make sure that we're properly offering them the right price and the right offering. The buying conditions, just make sure, again, that you're fairly adjusting it so it's a win-win situation. So those are some methods for negotiating buyer concerns. And again, I just want to give you some examples here of, or some insight really, in terms of what the objection might be and where that source of hesitation might be, right? And what we can do in terms of sales, in terms of offering a way to handle that objection. We'll look at examples here in terms of our negotiation worksheet. So for instance, what is the customer concern? It's a pricing issue if they have to stay within our budget. So what might a solution be? Again, we really have to articulate the value of our product. So we need to show that it's a superior benefit and this is what you're paying for. So particularly with price in terms of superior benefit, you really have to remind the client of what they're getting for that price and make sure that it's worth it. Stress the importance of the price-value relationship, right? Now remember, if you can connect this value to the challenge they had in the past, right? So I'm going to use that example of the charity dinner. You have an award-winning chef, then you're really emphasizing that value because they understand how important that aspect was and how they could have such a more successful event because of the better food quality at their event. So that's a very powerful method of dealing with this objection. Again, some other type of concern, we talked about loyalty before, right? So in this case, they're already satisfied with their other hotel. So how do we deal with this? Again, we can offer them a trial order, right? Not only are we giving them a trial order, but we're also emphasizing that sometimes it's exciting to go somewhere new. Maybe your guests are, yes, they've been to the same meeting at Marriott and it's been smooth, but hey, this is a new, refreshing place. Why not give your guests that opportunity? Now, we discussed price specifically. Here are just some do's and don'ts about price, okay? And again, I want you to remember how important it is that we've gone through the sales process. Again, clarifying what the questions are or concerns with the actual price. So we want to be specific. What exactly is it that they don't necessarily like about the price? What are specific options that they don't feel comfortable with? Clustering value of satisfaction. Now, this is particularly relevant when we're doing the FBR approach. Remember, we're doing the future benefit response, and in a way, we're going through each buying condition. We're showing the value that we're offering, and more importantly, the satisfaction that we're offering throughout that process. So in a way, we're dealing with this objection as we go through the FBR approach. And this do not make price the focal point. Now, this really goes back to that idea of balancing your presentation between information and persuasion. Yes, some information such as price will be part of your presentation, but it's not going to be your focal point. In fact, the persuasion part should be at least balanced, or if not more, part of your presentation. You really want to try and persuade your guests in terms of emotional links and really move away from the idea of the figures, because that's not really the purpose of our presentation. Another really important factor is not to apologize for the price, because what that does is really imply that you're not confident about the value that you're offering, right? You should feel confident. You should have already established a good, trustworthy relationship with your client so that you shouldn't feel like you're doing something wrong. You're actually offering them something, a very valuable service, and you should be confident in that. So never, ever apologize for the price. Don't say, I know it's a lot of money, I'm sorry for that. No, don't say anything like that. Be very positive about the price. Really point out the relationship between price, value, and price and quality. That's so important. And this really goes back to the FBR approach. Understanding specifically what the needs are of that client, right? If we can use that to really emphasize the quality. Remember, having an award-winning chef, there's no way that you can have that at a lower price. So in fact, having an award-winning chef to cater your event will justify a higher price. And just remind your client that the highest quality can never be obtained at the lowest price. And finally, explain the difference between price and cost, but really think about the long term. So if you're going to buy an initial, let's say, equipment, understand that yes, there is a price up front, but the cost of having that equipment can be very valuable in the long term. Really take a look at the first 5 do's and don'ts for your sales presentation. So that was our video on negotiating buyer concerns. Again, review some of these objections, feel confident understanding, and this is a really great opportunity to apply in your presentation, particularly when you're dealing with your objections. Make sure you follow some of these guidelines. Be aware of the concerns, understand how to negotiate those concerns. Thanks for watching.